Yeah, just so you know, it's a heavy week, and it's nothing too bad. Alleviate your concerns. This last Wednesday was the 20th anniversary of a pivotal moment in my military career. Soldier that I was in charge of. I sent him out one night in my place, and he died that night. And so it was heavy. It's a heavy thing. Struggled with it for a long time. And yeah, so 20 years, 2 decades, and it was a week of reflection, a week of considering just what God's done in my life, what darkness I went into, and what work God's done for me. So yeah, it's a heavy week, and I actually wrote the message for this week 2 weeks ago, and then I pulled it out last night to make sure I reviewed it and cleaned it up, and I was like, why am I preaching on this today? It's an emotional thing, and I'll get through it. I've got the tissue today. I'll get through it. But it's actually a meaningful message to me, even though it's an emotional message. The way we got here to this message is we've gone through the last groups of miracles from Jesus' 10 miracles in the valley. And we're learning that Matthew, he has intricately retold these miracles with a deeper spiritual truth at play than just the surface level physical event itself. And so we have to read Matthew metaphorically, seeing the physical events as great in and of themselves, but also stand-ins by Matthew for spiritual truths. And we have a slide that shows us the metaphors that we've gone through to this point. We can put the slide up with the metaphors, and reading at a deeper metaphorical level, our first group of miracles, it saw Jesus breaking down spiritual divisions and opening spiritual access to those who the religious elite had tried to place outside of boundaries. The second group of miracles, it's so much more than a storm on the sea. It's so much more than some dead pigs. It's so much more than that. It was about the spiritual cost that might come with following Jesus. And so now we come to our third group of miracles. Against the spiritual cost that was pointed out by the second group, the third group of miracles are going to consider the spiritual benefit of Jesus. And so we take the slide down. We're going to get into the third group of miracles. This third group was introduced with the idea that Jesus is bringing a new spiritual thing. Julie spoke on this passage a few weeks ago, and Jesus says of his new thing, you can't just take it and slap it on like a patch onto the old way that you had dressed up God. You can't just take it and stick it into the old wine containers within which you had placed God. This new thing, it cannot share space with the old. It will destroy the old. And Matthew expertly leads us to the brink of anticipation. What is this new thing? And it's to that answer that we started to consider last week with the 2 miracles of desperation. A Jewish leader comes to ask Jesus to bring his dead daughter back to life. And a bleeding woman endeavors to make contact with Jesus to stop her dying. They are desperation miracles because for the dead daughter of a Jewish leader, time had run out. And for the bleeding woman, options had run out. It's not hard to see that the idea of physical death is the common topic in these miracles. And in these 2 women, we found all of humanity. We found the half of humanity who have died, who are dead. And we have the other half, like us today, who are dying. But that's the surface level. So we're going to pick this up and we're going to work to not only look at the physical, literal events, but to consider what deeper meaning does Matthew wish for us to dig out of this. I love Miracle 7, the bleeding woman. It's packed with deep meaning. And Miracle 7 takes place as the dying woman approaches Jesus, believing that if she can just touch his clothing, she'll receive life. She'll be healed. Contrasted with the Jewish male leader who walks up boldly to Jesus and he asks him face to face for the healing of his dead daughter. Our bleeding woman comes timidly. It isn't her faith that's timid, though. We read that she is as sure as the male leper in miracle number 1, that she will be healed if she can just touch his garment. It's not her faith that's timid. And it isn't that she's uniquely worried about her uncleanliness, her cultural uncleanliness, and making Jesus unclean by touching him. She's not uniquely worried about that because the Jewish leader was also inviting Jesus to a situation of uncleanliness, to enter the house of a dead person, and Jesus is going to touch the dead body. And so the Jewish leader was also inviting Jesus to a state of uncleanliness as well. And so that's not what makes this woman unique. The difference we're presented with here that makes the woman timid, I believe, is her gender. Matthew plays on the gender divide by showing that a man is the Jewish leader. He elevates this man to Jewish leadership in a high place against not just a woman, but a woman 12 years an outcast, an unclean woman. The last woman Jesus healed was Peter's mother-in-law, and she didn't even seek it. This woman's a bit bolder. She is seeking it, but she's not so bold as to approach Jesus face to face. But even still, in her timidity, she will still receive a miracle. In Peter's mother-in-law, and here in the bleeding woman, we found a high value of women performed by Jesus. He elevates them in value, and we find that miracles do not hinge on our ability to have a strong enough faith to get in the face of God, to demand. Peter's mother-in-law didn't even ask. This woman is just creeping up to grab a touch of his clothes. The miracles don't hinge on us being strong enough to get them. As we consider the miracle that this woman experiences, we have to keep in mind that Matthew, he keeps redirecting us from the first things, what we call the Old Testament. He keeps redirecting us from there to Jesus. Everything that came first, the stuff that we too often call old, it points to, it answers, it serves, and it clarifies Jesus. And Matthew keeps stressing this point, and as he's just made the point that the new thing of Jesus can't be patched or poured into the old. Because what was before doesn't contain Jesus, but it points to him. And with that in mind, Matthew's and Jesus' push to leave the first and grab onto the new is going to be seen in this miracle. We'll consider the healing of this dying woman and realize the purposeful details with which Matthew, as an author, he does such a great job of putting the little details in there that bring to light the message he's trying to convey. We have a slide on the order of the healing, and we're going to leave this up for a little while. And on this slide, it has the the order in which this healing takes place. And it begins in the second verse of the story, actually. Because we're told in the second verse that the woman is doing this whole thing because she had intent, she believed if she touched the clothing of Jesus, she could be healed. And so it begins as this woman is convinced that touching Jesus' cloak will stop her dying. So off she goes to touch his clothing. But Matthew makes clear that she does not touch just any part of his clothing. She touches the tassel or the fringe of his garment. There's different theories about what this part of the clothing would have looked like, but the general idea is seen on the other slide. We have a tassel slide, if we can put up that picture really quick. And it might have looked something like this, is what the tassel may have looked like. And this is an image of her reaching to touch the tassel on Jesus' garment. There's 4 tassels. It would have involved some blue thread, and there would have been 4 tassels on the Jewish garment along the fringe. And these 4 tassels were symbolic of the Old Testament law or commands. And so we can go back to the last slide, the one with the order of the miracle, and she intends on touching his garment. So she goes out and she touches it. Matthew wants us to know she touches the tassel, the reflection of the old. And then there's a third part of this miracle. In the third part of this miracle, Jesus turns to her and he tells this timid woman to have courage. And he tells her that she is healed. Some readers try to make this a rule about how faith and physical healing are meant to play out from this moment. But they completely miss what Matthew's doing with these miracles. Physical healing and how it works is not Matthew's point. Matthew's not participating here in creating a doctrine about how physical healing comes about, any more than his first miracle was to teach about how to fix leprosy. There's a spiritual matter here that we're meant to see. So let's keep on going. The dying woman is convinced, if I just touch this tassel that's within reach, I'll find life. But Matthew wants us to know that she is mistaken. Matthew is a deliberate writer who puts key details into his writing. And he wants us to know that the woman's healing did not take place by touching the tassel. It took place only upon her introduction and her being recognized by Jesus and the words of life that came from Jesus. Because life doesn't come from a tassel. Life comes from Jesus. We read that Jesus looks at her and Jesus speaks the life of her healing to her. And then the last part of the miracle. Only when she is introduced to and she interacts with and she hears the words of Jesus is she healed. So what's Matthew telling us spiritually at this point? Here's what I see. The woman is a stand-in. The woman is a metaphor for the spiritually dying. We are getting spiritual truths from these physical moments, and Matthew is telling us things so much deeper. And this woman is a stand-in for all of those who are spiritually dying, who are spiritually bleeding to death. And the physical life she finds on this occasion with Jesus is the spiritual life that we're all invited to find with him. And it goes further. She is a stand-in for all who are convinced that if they just reach out and hold the tassel, the Mosaic Law, the Scripture, the First Testament, that in that they will find life. But as we've read in the past, in the Gospel of Matthew, Jesus says, you search the First Testament. You reach and you grab onto the tassel because you think there is life in there. But all of that points to me. And it's me who is the life. Matthew doesn't record those words of Jesus that John writes because he's an amazing author. And he movingly paints the same words that Jesus speaks in the Gospel of Matthew. He movingly paints them as a picture in the imagery of this miracle. With Matthew's skill, the words of Jesus from John become a vividly realized story of a mistaken, desperate, dying woman reaching for the tassel where she thinks she will find life. But instead, she finds that the tassel only passes her on and introduces her to the person who really is life. It's with Jesus that she finds life. John's a great author, and he gives us the words of Jesus. But I just love how Matthew has given us pictures, how he has taken this image of a miracle and he has told us the same thing that Jesus says in the Gospel of John. But you can see it and you can feel it. In telling of the bleeding woman, Matthew teaches us where to look for spiritual life against the spiritual death that the world can induce. To put it in the words of Matthew's metaphor, the pages of the Bible, are our literary tassel. These are the threads that are visible to us to draw our attention, and we grasp at them as we look for life. This is why I've previously used the wording that I'm here not to preach the Bible. I'm here to preach Jesus, because there is where life is found. But I use the Bible to do so because the Bible is a tassel for a bleeding woman. It's the instrument which we can reach out and grasp for to initiate an introduction to the person beyond the tassel, to Jesus. After the bleeding woman is healed by Jesus, Jesus moves from the dying to the dead. He continues on his way to the dead daughter. And when he gets to her, he finds the mourners gathered. And he tells them to leave her because she's only sleeping. And they laugh at him as they exit. I love what two ancient saints have to tell us of this moment. Saint Betty says, to men she is dead, but to God she's asleep. Saint Jerome says that to God she is not dead, but sleeps, because to God all things live. There are no dead things to God. My own way that I've come to understand it, the girl is asleep because death does not exist in the presence of Jesus. Whatever description sounds good to you, ultimately Jesus takes the dead daughter's hand, and she's brought to life. She wakes up. And the people are astounded that life comes when the time of hope had run out. The kids will be coming back here in a few minutes. We'll have Nate wrap up over there, and they'll come back in a few minutes while we close at looking at the spiritual truth behind miracle number 8, behind the dead daughter. If the bleeding woman reflected the spiritual seekers who are looking and reaching for life with spiritual hands, then the daughter reflects the spiritually dead. These are the spiritually incapacitated who have succumbed to the spiritual death of this world. The daughter reflects those for whom the hope of time, by human standards, had run out. Many reflected in the daughter. They walk our world today. The spark of spiritual life within them, the spark that can move those like the bleeding woman to reach out. For the spiritually dead, the spark has been extinguished by the world. These living dead can be found all around us. They're not the spiritually dying. These are the spiritually dead, and the dead cannot reach for anything. Not that they will not that they're refusing, but they have become unable in and of themselves to reach. They cannot seek life anymore. These are the ones so far gone that they cannot help themselves, and they have been written off as dead by others. They've been written off as a lost cause. But what we see in the actions of Jesus is that for the hands that cannot reach for the life in him, he comes with his life to reach for their hands. He reaches for their hands and he wakes up their soul. And such was my experience. Which is why this message is so emotional. With the loss of my soldier, with other things in life, I reached spiritual death. I no longer could even try to reach for life. Jesus takes the hands of those for whom others will laugh at him. Because they're a lost cause. It's done. It's too late. It's over. It's done. And they laugh. But he takes their hands because when Jesus is present, time is different. And death is not a reality. For Jesus, there only exists a tired soul, worn out, sleeping, waiting to be awakened by the touch of love. This is the core of the new thing that Jesus is bringing. It's spiritual life. It's not as often spoken of as a cliche. It's not a Joel Osteen life, where life is easy as things are easy. The new thing of Jesus is life when the future is declaring death. The new thing of Jesus is life where time seems to have run out. The new thing of Jesus is a life that's not protected by temple walls of fear and separation. It's a life that is spread with a word of courage and a touch of love. We're going to take communion today. We haven't done so in a while. If you need communion, would you raise your hand and we can have someone run communion out to you. People may have grabbed it. We got a couple hands up here. Anybody else? Let's see. Raise hands if you need communion there. Anyone else? All right, we're good. In communion, we see enacted the new thing that Jesus brought. So we come to the bread. In the bread today, I see the person who is beyond the tassel, who came to be encountered by those who would reach, who will speak life to the dying, who are reaching desperately. I see that person in the bread today. Let's take the bread. In the cup today, I see life that refuses to accept it's too late. I see life that refuses to give up. And it's spilled out from the cross to take the hand of the world that can't reach for it. So the blood reaches for the world. It reaches for a sleeping world. Sleeping because before God, death does not exist. See the hand of God reaching for those whose souls are so tired, they've fallen asleep. Let's take the cup. We're going to close with one more song of worship. As we go into worship, I think there's parts of us that can always be spiritually bleeding in one way or another. There's parts of us that might be spiritually dead, and we've cordoned them off. And so as we worship, I can invite you to consider what those parts are in you, or what's really cool with the dead daughter and what I experienced in my own life is that there are those who realize before God, death is not it. And they know that life can be brought. And so like the dead daughter's father, when all others say it's too late, they tenaciously hold on to hope and they seek it. I was brought before God by many people in the dark times of my life. People who tenaciously said, don't care how long it's been, time hasn't run out, it's not over. So I invite you to consider maybe who is it that you can be tenacious for? Who is it that you can be like the dead daughter's father? And as we close in worship, you can carry them to Jesus. To say, would you come take their hand? They're asleep and I need them to wake up.